The year was 1997, and both the Sony PlayStation and Nintendo 64 were in full swing. Many video games and franchises had gone fully 3D with the capabilities of these platforms. One such franchise, Castlevania, took a bold direction to keep its 2D charm while incorporating 3D elements. The previous entry in the series, Rondo of Blood, was a fantastic game starring Richter Belmont and is still considered one of the best in the series to this day. In addition to the challenge of surpassing Rondo of Blood, Konami released a new Castlevania game in the same year as the following titles: Final Fantasy VII, GoldenEye 007, Age of Empires, Star Fox 64, Fallout, Yoshi's Story, Grand Theft Auto, Final Fantasy Tactics, Mega Man X4, and Tekken 3, among others. Yes, 1997 was one of the best years ever in video game history. Can you imagine developing and releasing a game while trying to compete with these others? Well, Konami did just that and released Castlevania Symphony of the Night. I personally did not own Symphony of the Night until a few years after release, but I was able to play it briefly via rentals and friends that had the game. When I went to Walmart to get my first PlayStation 1, I only had money for a single game. And after staring into the cabinet for what seemed like an eternity, I chose to be different than everyone else at school and go with Final Fantasy Tactics instead of Final Fantasy VII. Having spent so much time with Tactics, I didn't really get to play Symphony of the Night until a couple years later. In fact, back when I was a kid, there was such a thing as taking PE in the summer so you could take advanced courses during the regular school year. My best friend and I at the time literally spent all summer during PE class talking about Final Fantasy Tactics and Symphony of the Night, which are still two of my favorite games to this day. Back then, the internet was in its infancy, and excitement built from word of mouth and magazines. Needless to say, Symphony of the Night is still a title that I hold in high reverence today. Development on this game began in 1994, originally being called Castlevania The Bloodletting. However, the project was basically scrapped, and the original ideas were moved over to PlayStation to start a new project. Symphony of the Night was inspired by many other games like Zelda, Metroid, and many popular RPGs available at the time. One goal for Symphony of the Night was to make a game that could be played for a long time and deviates from a linear path, allowing the player to progress and unlock areas as they go. In this regard, the game drew inspiration from Castlevania II, Simon's Quest, exploration-based gameplay. Symphony of the Night has been re-released multiple times, and the version of the game that I played for this review is the Castlevania Requiem version on PS5, simply because I had never played the PSP port and was curious to see the differences, notably the dialogue changes, which honestly I didn't care for, but I will get into that later. Role-playing elements are also seen throughout, with Alucard having hit point and magic meters, along with the ability to level up via experience and a massive arsenal of various weapons and accessories to choose from. Also in RPG style, most of these inventory items are acquired from rare enemy drops, some of which are less than a 1% chance of acquisition. This game also holds many secrets and more than one ending possibility, many of which I will be revealing at various parts of this review. So, let's get started. First, I'll talk about the graphics. Symphony of the Night took a different direction than most games during this period, choosing to stay true to its 2D roots. That's not to say, however, that this game is fully 2D. There are many points where 3D elements are incorporated into the game, most notably some of the background elements that the player runs into, along with common things like the save point icosahedron. And yes, icosahedron is a real word. For me, it isn't these 3D elements that make the game visually impressive, it's the sheer amount of impressive sprite work that Konami did in this game. Sprites are incredibly detailed and look fantastic. One of the most impressive things is the work done on Alucard's sprite for him to have a shadowy trail wherever he goes, like he's shifting in and out of planes as he simply moves across the map. The combination of detailed, living backgrounds along with the 2D sprite work makes this game undeniably unique to its time, and part of me thinks it inspired the latest HD 2D craze, like the work seen in the new Suikoden HD remaster, the next game that I'll be reviewing on this channel. Additionally, even Alucard's inventory items have their own sprites. Most weapons and cloaks in the game have unique art, as do the consumable items. In fact, there's even a customizable cloak that allows the player to alter its colors. There's definitely a nostalgic feeling for me getting out the Osafune katana and inputting a Dragon Punch command to see the multiple colored waves come out of the sword after Alucard briefly teleports. Let's not forget about the massive bosses either. While some bosses are relatively close to the size of Alucard, one being particularly close, Some bosses take up the majority of the screen, such as Beelzebub, and have multiple sprite layers to accommodate the nature of the fight. Overall, while the graphics in places are still a tad blurry or jagged, you can't help but fall in love with the charm of the game, especially when playing it back during the time of its release. Now I'll talk a bit about the gameplay. Honestly, the gameplay is one of the two best features of the game, along with the music. One thing I've always loved about Symphony of the Night is how responsive the controls are and how tight the gameplay feels. If something goes awry, or you die and return to a save point, it's mostly the player's fault 100% of the time. Maybe the player didn't have the proper setup for a boss, or simply didn't avoid an attack correctly, but the gameplay and controls can't be faulted here. Alucard has 2 action buttons, one for each hand, which can equip a weapon, shield, or two-handed weapon, and several spells and transformations available to him that can be acquired throughout the game. The weapons and transformations vary greatly in usefulness, with some being basically useless, while others make you an unstoppable machine, such as the Chrysogrim. There are some game-breaking items, if you know where to look for them, and while fun, completely remove the challenge from the game. Someone playing this game for the first time has a very low chance of getting one of these item drops, but if they do acquire it, it can ruin the challenge of the game that's already fairly easy to begin with. Castlevania games are known for being on the more difficult side, but this definitely is not one of them. Outside of a couple difficult bosses and a couple regular enemies that do way more damage than others, like the Nova Skeleton, this is a pretty manageable game for the average player. Another quality of life feature that I use almost exclusively for the entire game is the backdash. Pressing triangle causes Alucard to evade backwards, which also happens to be faster than regular movement. For most of the game, I simply face the opposite direction and use this feature for regular movement. After some practice, it becomes pretty easy to continuously do this, turn around and hit an enemy, and then turn back around and keep dashing. This technique, along with the anti-gravity boots and bat transformation smash, make navigating each environment pretty quick and simple. As mentioned about the Osafune Katana, many weapons in the game also have additional inputs beyond a normal attack that take a little bit of the magic meter to do something additional. For example, the Fist of Tulkas can shoot a fireball, or the Shield Rod can do multiple different things depending on the shield equipped alongside the rod. This provides nearly endless weapon combinations and ways to defeat enemies. I'll show my personal favorite later in a section. Another gameplay feature is the acquisition and use of familiar cards. These cards summon different familiars to help Alucard in a variety of ways. For example, the Demon card will fight alongside Alucard and can also press buttons and walls if one were located on the map, while the Fairy will assist by using restorative items. Since I'm playing the Requiem version, I also had access to 2 familiars that I've personally never seen before since I've always played the regular PlayStation version. One of these is the Fairy card, which is spelled differently than the one I mentioned a moment ago, and simply talks and sings to Alucard when he's sitting down. The other one I'll mention later in this review toward the end. Next, I'll discuss my favorite part of the game, the music. In case my content viewers haven't figured it out by now, there's a strong correlation between the games that I enjoy the most and the soundtrack. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that Castlevania Symphony of the Night is in the top 5 video game soundtracks of all time. If I was rating this score alone, it would be an easy 10 without question, even though there are a couple of tracks that feel slightly out of place for the part of the castle where they are. I don't really care either way, I'm still giving it a 10. One such track is called Wandering Ghosts, which is found in the castle arena. The track is great, but doesn't quite fit the arena, which is one of the most gruesome and bloody looking portions of the entire map. There are other tracks, like Wood Carving Partitia, which are absolutely brilliant and fit the environment perfectly. And last, I'll mention another of my personal favorites, Lost Paintings, which at low volumes could probably serve as a sleep aid. Outside of the amazing score, the rest of the audio is simply mediocre. The voice acting in the original game had a muffled and unrefined sound to it. However, the dialogue itself I enjoyed far more than the more modern version that I played for this review, which had clearer audio, but the reworked dialogue was not as good. I mean, how can you possibly exclude the most classic line in this game or any other Castlevania game?
Your words are as empty as your soul. Mankind ill needs a savior such as you.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets. But enough talk. Have at you.
All I'm here for is you. To hell with your heresy. You're nothing but a blight on mankind.
Ha! Mankind. A cesspit of hatred and lies. Fight for them, and die for their sins!
Beyond this, I would call the rest of the sound effects in the game mediocre and serviceable. Now I will talk a bit about the story and my playthrough. If you don't want spoilers, now is the time to skip to the next section. Symphony of the Night begins just a few years after Rondo of Blood, where Richter Belmont defeats Dracula. During the opening sequence of the game, we once again control Richter as he confronts Dracula in the final stage called Bloodlines. What happens after this is unknown, with Richter seemingly disappearing. Alucard comes to the current reincarnation of the castle shortly after to destroy it and meets Maria Renard, who asks him to help find Richter. At this point, the player can progress through and unlock different parts of the castle, even locating Richter in the arena. After locating Richter, he appears again in the same spot where he fought Dracula before, and once Alucard has the mobility to reach this area, can fight Richter and put an end to the game, receiving the bad ending. However, there's much more to the game. First, as soon as Alucard purchases the Jewel of Open from the librarian and can access Bat form, he can fight an optional boss called the Succubus to obtain an item called the Gold Ring after viewing a false flashback of his mother Lisa. When examining the ring in the inventory though, we see the message, "Where Clock," which is interesting because there are two notable clock locations in the game, which are the clock tower area and also the central clock room where we run into Maria again. While the game doesn't really give any hints about this, it's likely that the player passed by a room filled with unpassable spikes in the Royal Chapel. These spikes can be broken by wearing the Spike Breaker armor, which is located on the total opposite end of the map in the catacombs. Accessing this armor also requires the player to have found Echo of Bat, located in Olrox's quarters after defeating him. With the Spike Breaker equipped, Alucard can pass through the spikes and find another ring, the Silver Ring. When both rings are equipped on Alucard, he can enter the central clock room again to access an area blocked with large stone blocks, where he will once again find Maria. In the PlayStation version, Maria simply hands Alucard a pair of holy glasses, believing that there's something odd and unseen about Richter. But in the Requiem version that I played, I actually had to fight Maria before she gave me the glasses, which I appreciated and think this test should have been left in all versions to see if the player was ready for what's next. With the holy glasses equipped, Alucard can go and fight Richter to find something different. There's a floating orb hovering above that can be attacked. After breaking this orb, we learn that Shaft has been controlling Richter, while all the while trying to resurrect Dracula. At this point, we've now unlocked the inverted castle and the true second half of the game. One interesting thing to note about the holy glasses is that there's an invisible trigger switch at this very point that can be bypassed with the wolf form to see Shaft without actually having the glasses. Inside the inverted castle, enemies have gotten much stronger, and Alucard can level up very quickly and find much stronger gear. The story really disappears here, except that the player must locate 5 pieces of Dracula's body, which are held by 5 bosses in the inverted castle. Every other boss is optional. Once Alucard has these, he can go straight to the same central clock room, and Shaft will once again open the area where we fought Maria before for the holy glasses, and will enter the final 2 encounters of the game. Depending on how much of the map was unlocked, the good ending can have one of 2 very small differences, which I didn't bother to do for this review. However, I'm not quite done yet.
Go back to the abyss. Trouble the soul of my mother no more.
There are some things that I really wanted to do, simply because I think they're fun or hilarious. Now I'll move into some hints and secrets as the final part of this review. This won't cover all of them, just a few that I really enjoy. First, I reloaded my save, and for old time's sake, used a library card during the Dracula fight just to get back to the regular castle, which is where I wanted to be. For my first order of business, I wanted to get the coveted Axe Lord armor from the librarian. In order to do this, the player needs to go to the room under the librarian where the life up was acquired before. and use the anti-gravity boots in a very specific way. Alucard must repeatedly hit the librarian straight up many times without the librarian touching the ceiling, nor Alucard touching the floor. You can get 3 items in a row this way: a Ring of Arcana, the Dracula tunic, and finally, the coveted Axe Lord armor. Not only is this a trophy on the PlayStation, but it's also just one of those things that you have to do. I mean, just look at this badass. Next, I headed down to the arena where 3 more of my objectives were. First, since I was playing the Requiem version, I simply had to get the Nose Demon card for the first time. This guy is a real looker, and even manages to try and convince Alucard that he's better looking.
Hey, how's everybody doing tonight? Wait a minute, huh? You're my master? Not much of a looker, are ya?
Next, I farmed blue Axe Knights in this area until I got the Axe Lord shield, an item almost as cool as the Axe Lord armor. With the shield rod equipped, pressing both buttons at the same time summons a mini blue Axe Knight to terrorize the battlefield. And finally in the arena, I farmed the gold skeleton enemy called Paranthropus for the strongest accessory in the game, the Ring of Varda, which can only be dropped by this enemy when the player has a cleared save file on the memory card. And my last order of business was to acquire 2 Heaven Swords from the Cloak Knight in the Clock Tower. The sword is unique in that it's a projectile, but with 2 of them you can perform an attack that does many stabs in a row and looks pretty cool. I had never gotten it before in any playthrough, so I figured I would do it now. Now armed with Axe Lord armor, Ring of Varda, 2 Heaven Swords, and the Nose Demon, I knew exactly how I wanted to finish the game again. So I headed back to Shaft's room, where I channeled the pure, raw power of the Axe Lord to wreak havoc on Shaft in the most trolly way possible. I then went to fight Dad with 2 Heaven Swords equipped, and as expected, he lasted about as long as he probably did with Alucard's mom during the conception process.
Go back to the abyss. Trouble the soul of my mother no more.
I then let the credits roll, watching the good ending, though technically not the best ending, play out in its entirety.
So you had to fight your own father? It's my fault. If I hadn't been so weak, we wouldn't be here.
Not so. I had my own reasons to face him.
Still, it couldn't have been easy.
It wasn't. But remember, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph
Is for good men to do nothing.
So, in summary, I still love this game as much as I did over 25 years ago. The sprite work and graphics are overall excellent, the gameplay is tight, responsive, and fun, and the music is absolutely top tier. This is not a perfect game by any stretch of the imagination, however. As mentioned, this game is almost too easy at times, especially after acquiring a weapon like the Chrysogrim. The voice acting has its own set of issues in each version, the first game being overall audio quality, and the Requiem version having less impactful dialogue. I did also enjoy the added bonuses in the Requiem version regarding the Maria fight and the extra familiars. The story in this game definitely isn't anything top tier, but it's serviceable given that this game and series is much more known for gameplay and the story is just icing on the cake. Some of the bosses are so easy that you can't even really call them bosses, and with the Chrysogrim, some of them last literal seconds. If you want to enjoy the boss encounters, I would highly recommend using a less powerful but still good weapon like the aforementioned Osafune Katana. Overall, I give Castlevania Symphony of the Night a score of 8.5 out of 10, even though I personally think the game is in my top 10 favorites of all time. I'd like to thank you all for your strong support lately, especially with my Mega Man 2 video. If you haven't yet, please also check out my Mega Man X video for my thoughts and history with that game. I hope you enjoyed the Symphony of the Night review, and if so, please smash that like and subscribe button and leave me a comment below about your experience with the game. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next video.